A man in torn clothes was kicked out of a diner for asking to wash dishes in exchange for food until Keanu Reeves stood up and said 7 words that froze the entire restaurant. What happened next didn't just change that man's life, it changed the town. But no one saw what was coming next. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. It was supposed to be just lunch. No cameras, no headlines, just quiet. The wind swept through Santa Fe's historic plaza, tugging at scarves and coats as the chill of autumn settled in. The sky above was a bright blue, sharp and cloudless, but the air carried a bite that made locals quicken their steps. It was the kind of afternoon made for soup and silence, the kind of day where no one expected anything to happen. Least of all, Keanu Reeves. He walked alone down the cobbled sidewalk, his black boots crunching softly over scattered leaves. A wool cap was pulled low over his head, and a dark peacoat hung loosely from his frame. His eyes hidden behind modest sunglasses scanned the street with calm purpose. He wasn't here to be seen. No entourage followed him. No cameras clicked. He had just wrapped a small location scout for an indie project and was planning to grab a quiet meal before returning to his rental home in the outskirts of town. That's when he heard it. The voice came from ahead by the old adobe-style diner that sat on the corner, the Rojo Table, a place known for its red chile, pozole, artisan tortillas, and rustic charm. But something was wrong. Voices were raised not loud, but tense. Keanu slowed, then stopped. On the sidewalk outside the entrance, a man in tattered layers stood with his hands slightly raised. His hair was long, streaked with gray and dust. His beard was full but tangled. His skin was dry and weathered, his body thin beneath oversized clothing. He looked exhausted, but not defeated. The diner's manager, a middle-aged man in a maroon apron, stood firm at the doorway, arms crossed. "I told you before," the manager said, trying to sound calm, but clearly frustrated. "You can't linger here. It makes the customers uncomfortable." "I wasn't begging," the man replied softly. "Just asked if there were any dishes I could wash. Just something for a meal. I haven't eaten in 2 days." His voice was low, scratchy, but dignified. There was no anger in it, no aggression, just hunger and a kind of weariness that was hard to fake. A few pedestrians passed by, quickening their pace. A couple on vacation looked away. Someone across the street pulled out their phone, but didn't intervene. The scene was awkward, uncomfortable, and getting colder by the second. Keanu watched. For a moment, he stood still, unnoticed. He didn't look famous. He didn't want to be. But something in the man's tone stopped him. Not pity, not guilt, something else. Something he remembered from somewhere deep inside. A memory. A promise. And then he moved. Keanu stepped onto the curb and walked straight toward the commotion. His footsteps measured his expression, unreadable beneath the brim of his wool cap. The manager noticed him first. His posture shifted. He blinked as if not quite trusting his own eyes. The homeless man turned confused as Keanu stopped beside him. "I believe he was offering to work for a meal," Keanu said calmly, his voice even, but unmistakably firm. "That doesn't sound unreasonable." The manager hesitated. "Sir, it's just... we have a policy." Keanu nodded slowly. "I understand." A pause stretched between them. A few more onlookers had stopped. Someone across the plaza pointed, whispering to a friend. It wasn't every day Keanu Reeves walked into a small-town restaurant confrontation. The homeless man glanced at him uncertain. His fingers twitched at his sides. He didn't understand what was happening. Keanu looked at him and asked gently, "What's your name?" The man swallowed before answering. Miguel Alvarez." Keanu turned back to the manager. "Then Miguel will be dining with me." Those 7 words hung in the air like thunder. The manager's mouth opened, then closed. He looked around, seeing the people watching phones beginning to rise discreetly. The kitchen staff peeked through the swinging doors. A busboy froze with a tray of glasses. Everyone was waiting. A teenager on a nearby bench pulled out his phone and tapped record. "Of course, Mr. Reeves," the manager said at last, stepping aside. "Your usual table?" "I don't have a usual," Keanu replied, "but something near the window would be nice." Miguel stood still. He wasn't used to doors opening for him, let alone being invited in. He looked at Keanu as if trying to find the trick, the catch, the reason this wasn't real. Keanu gestured toward the entrance. "Shall we?" Miguel nodded slowly and followed. As the two men stepped inside, the room went quiet. The warmth of the restaurant contrasted sharply with the cold outside. Wood floors creaked underfoot. The smell of green chili, stew, garlic, and slow-roasted meat filled the air. Tables of diners stopped mid-conversation. Keanu said nothing more. He simply followed the hostess to the booth by the window, waited for Miguel to slide in first, then took the seat across from him. Outside, the teenager who'd taken the video was already typing. "Keanu Reeves just invited a homeless man to lunch at our diner. No one knew what to say. Respect." He hit post. By the time the waitress arrived with 2 glasses of water, the story had already started its quiet ripple across the internet. But inside the diner, at that small wooden booth, none of that mattered yet. What mattered was one man who hadn't eaten in 2 days and another who refused to look away. The waitress approached the table with a mixture of nerves and curiosity. She smoothed her apron before asking, "Can I get you both something to drink?" "Coffee, tea." Her voice wavered as she glanced at Miguel, unsure how to behave in a moment that already felt bigger than the room they were standing in. Miguel kept his eyes low. "Water is fine," he murmured. Keanu nodded. "Same for me, thank you." The waitress stepped away, still trying to process the sight of Keanu Reeves sitting across from a man who looked like life had been chewing him apart for years. The other diners whispered in hushed tones, their voices blending with the clatter of silverware and kitchen sounds. Miguel's hands trembled slightly as he held the menu. He didn't open it, just stared at the cover. "I'm not sure what to do," he admitted quietly. "You're doing fine," Keanu said. "Take your time." Miguel finally opened the menu, but his eyes didn't seem to focus. "Food looks good," he said, almost under his breath. "Been a long time since I sat at a table like this." Keanu didn't rush him. He didn't fill the silence. He simply watched him with a calm patience that made Miguel breathe a little steadier. Outside the window, a gust of wind pushed dry leaves across the plaza, swirling them like they were searching for a place to land. People drifted past the restaurant, unaware that something extraordinary was unfolding behind the glass. The waitress returned with 2 glasses of water. She set them down gently. Miguel's fingers brushed the condensation on the glass, and he seemed startled by the cold, as if he had forgotten what it felt like to hold something fresh and clean. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "Miguel, if you want something warm, order it. Anything." Miguel nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "I don't want to cause trouble." "You're not causing trouble," Keanu replied. "You're having lunch with me, that's all." Those words seemed to settle into Miguel's bones, warming a place inside him that had gone cold a long time ago. At the front of the diner, the manager pretended to wipe down the counter while sneaking glances toward the booth. The incident outside replayed in his mind each moment, growing heavier. He hadn't meant to be cruel, but sometimes cruelty wasn't intentional, it was just easy. Now watching Keanu treat Miguel with such simple human respect, the manager felt a tightness in his chest he couldn't explain. 2 tourists at a nearby table lowered their cameras after snapping a quick photo. One whispered, "Is he really just sitting there with him?" "Like it's nothing." Her companion nodded. "Yeah, that's why it's something." Back at the booth, Miguel took his first sip of water. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he looked like a man remembering what it felt like to be alive. Keanu watched him quietly and thought, "This is why I stopped. This was the moment that would change everything, not because he was famous, but because he refused to look away when everyone else did." Santa Fe in late autumn had a quiet way of settling into the day, as if the whole city breathed in slow, thoughtful rhythms. The adobe buildings, warm in tone and soft along the edges, stood beneath a sky that shifted from bright blue to gentle gray without warning. Tourists wandered through the arts district with cameras swinging from their wrists, stopping to admire pottery paintings and jewelry that reflected hundreds of years of cultural roots. But beyond the tourist streets, locals moved with a calmer purpose, keeping the city grounded in its everyday life. Keanu had always liked places like this, cities where fame didn't echo so loudly, places where he could be a face in the crowd instead of a headline. After wrapping a demanding film project in Los Angeles, he came to Santa Fe hoping for a short break, a stretch of days where he could breathe without cameras or scripts. He rented a small house miles outside the city center, surrounded by whispering trees and a view of the mountains that seemed to follow the sunrise. For the first time in weeks, he slept without alarms and woke without meetings. On this day, he had only meant to walk into town, wander a bit, maybe get a bowl of soup at a place he had been told locals loved. That place was the Rojo Table, a rustic farm-to-table diner that had a reputation for warm service and even warmer meals. It was the kind of spot where families gathered after church, where artists sipped coffee over sketchbooks, and where travelers sat shoulder to shoulder with locals without anyone thinking twice. Inside the diner, the crowd was lively. A group of painters discussed an exhibit opening that evening. A family visiting from Chicago sampled their first bowl of New Mexico red chili. A pair of musicians whispered lyrics back and forth as they wrote in a notebook covered with doodles. The staff moved quickly between tables, balancing trays, pouring water, offering smiles. It was the kind of place that felt safe, predictable, comforting. But just outside its doors, a different kind of story had been unfolding. Miguel Alvarez had lived in Santa Fe longer than most of the new residents and tourists combined, yet almost no one knew him. They had seen him, of course. A thin man with a fading beard, layered jackets, and tired eyes that rarely met anyone else's. People passed him at the train station where he often slept. They noticed him sitting near the plaza, silent and still blending into the background with the pigeons and autumn shadows. He wasn't threatening, he wasn't loud, he simply existed in the spaces people didn't want to occupy. To most, he had become one of the city's invisible residents, a ghost. But on this afternoon, Miguel stepped out of the shadows and into the center of a moment that no one would forget. Keanu had watched the confrontation unfold just minutes before. Now the two of them sat inside the warm diner. The world around them paused in quiet disbelief, and whispers had already started to travel through the room. "That's Keanu Reeves," someone murmured. The whispers rippled from table to table, soft enough not to interrupt the atmosphere, but strong enough to shift the room's energy. A tourist couple paused mid-bite. The painters glanced up from their notebooks. Even the musicians stopped tapping notes long enough to confirm what their eyes were telling them. Yes, it really was him, Keanu Reeves. Sitting across from a man they had all stepped around, ignored or forgotten more times than they could count. The Rojo Table had hosted celebrities before. Actors, singers, politicians, travelers from every part of the world. But none of those visits had ever felt like this. None of them had stopped the room in this particular way because none of them had brought in a man like Miguel as their guest. The staff nearby exchanged glances that carried confusion, surprise, and even a bit of embarrassment. A waitress who had nearly refused to seat Miguel now kept her eyes low, suddenly aware of how the moment had shifted. The manager, still recovering from the scene outside, stood frozen behind the counter, wiping the same spot over and over, unable to look away from the booth by the window. Miguel sat stiffly, as though afraid that one wrong movement would wake him from a dream. The warmth from the overhead lights softened the lines in his face, revealing exhaustion, but also something unfamiliar for him. Safety. The kind of safety that came from being treated as more than a burden. Keanu's presence didn't dominate the room, it grounded it. He didn't act like a famous actor sharing a moment with someone beneath him. He didn't look around for attention. He simply existed in the space with Miguel, equal and steady, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. A woman from the far corner leaned toward her friend. "Why would he sit with him?" she whispered. Her friend answered softly, "Maybe because no one else would." The teenager who had snapped the photo earlier was typing furiously on his phone, unaware of the scale of what he had just set in motion. To him, it was just a moment worth sharing. Something surprising, something cool. But the moment it reached the internet, it would become something else entirely. The seed of a story people didn't know they needed. Meanwhile, Keanu and Miguel remained unaware of the attention. The window beside them framed a view of the plaza where leaves drifted in slow spirals. The sunlight cast a gentle glow across their table, illuminating the contrast between the two men. Keanu in a simple dark coat, quiet and composed. Miguel in worn layers and faded colors, holding onto the menu like it might disappear. Keanu spoke softly so only Miguel could hear. "I hope you're comfortable." Miguel nodded. I don't really know how to be right now. Then we'll figure it out together," Keanu said. And with those words, the tension in Miguel's shoulders eased just a little. The waitress returned to the table with a tentative smile, trying to regain her composure after realizing who her guest truly was. She kept her voice steady as she said, "Are you both ready to order, or do you need more time?" Her eyes flickered to Miguel, then back to Keanu, unsure how to navigate this unfamiliar moment. Miguel hesitated. He looked down at the menu again, but reading wasn't the problem. Deciding was, wanting was. Allowing himself to choose something he hadn't tasted in years felt like trespassing into a world he no longer belonged to. Keanu noticed the struggle. "Order whatever you want," he said gently. "You're my guest today." That word. Guest. It softened something in Miguel's expression. He nodded slowly, then whispered, "Maybe." "The stew. The red chili one." "Good choice," Keanu replied. "I'll have the same." The waitress jotted down the order, thanked them, and hurried away, grateful for something to do that didn't involve staring at the most unexpected table in the restaurant. As soon as she left, the atmosphere shifted again. The busboy from earlier approached the counter, whispering to another employee. A couple near the door moved their chairs slightly so they could see better. But there was no mockery in the room now, no discomfort, only curiosity, respect, and something else too, something people hadn't expected to feel for a stranger, shame. The quiet kind that settles in when you realize you've been walking around someone for years without ever asking their name. Near the entrance, a young woman whispered, "I've seen him sleeping by the train station. Didn't know his name was Miguel." Her friend nodded. Didn't know anyone cared. Back at the booth, Miguel finally looked Keanu in the eye. "You didn't have to do this," he said softly. "Most people pretend I'm not even there." Keanu rested his hands on the table, calm and sincere. "Everyone deserves to be seen." Miguel swallowed hard. His throat tightened. He wasn't used to words like that. Not anymore. Outside the window, a gust of wind lifted a swirl of orange leaves, carrying them across the glass like a small fleeting dance. The light dimmed as a cloud drifted overhead, casting a cooler shade into the diner. In that moment, the booth felt like a tiny world separated from everything outside. Just two men sharing a table, one trying to remember what dignity felt like, the other offering it without expecting anything in return. Then it happened. The teenager's phone buzzed. His eyes widened. The photo he posted minutes earlier had already gained traction. Likes, comments, shares. It was beginning to travel far beyond this room. And with each new share, the story of the man no one noticed and the actor who did began its journey outward, spreading across the digital world like a spark searching for dry ground. Inside the diner, the spark hadn't reached the booth yet. For now, everything remained quiet, steady, human. Miguel took a breath and whispered, "Thank you." Keanu nodded. "Lunch is just the beginning." The waiter approached the table slowly, as if stepping into a moment he wasn't entirely sure he belonged in. His posture was polite, careful, and his eyes flickered between Miguel and Keanu with a mix of uncertainty and respect. This wasn't a usual pairing. This wasn't a usual day. And everyone in the diner could feel it. "Your meals will be right out," he said quietly before turning away. Miguel nodded, but didn't speak. His hands were still trembling where they rested, at the edge of the table. It wasn't fear, it wasn't cold, it was the overwhelming sensation of being somewhere he thought he'd never be again. Indoors, warm, seated, expected, served. Keanu noticed the way Miguel's fingers curled and uncurled. "If you're nervous," he said softly, "don't be. We're just having lunch." Miguel gave a faint, shaky smile. "I haven't had a real lunch with another person in a long time." "You're not alone today," Keanu replied. For a moment, that reassurance seemed to settle the air between them. The scent of simmering chilies drifted from the kitchen, earthy and warm. It reminded Miguel of something distant, something buried under months of cold nights and skipped meals. He inhaled deeply, and the emotion in his chest tightened. He blinked hard, steadying himself. When the plates finally arrived, the waiter set them down gently, almost reverently, as if aware of the weight this moment carried. 2 plates of simple food eggs cooked softly, rice seasoned with garlic and onion, warm tortillas folded in a basket, and a small bowl of beans that let off a soft steam. Comfort food. Honest food. Miguel stared at his plate. His lips parted, but no sound came. The smell alone nearly brought him to tears. He swallowed and placed his hand around the warm ceramic grounding himself. Keanu noticed the hesitation. "Start with whatever you've missed most." Miguel picked up a tortilla with slow, deliberate movements. His fingertips lingered on the warmth as though checking if it was really there. He took a bite, small and cautious, and for a moment he froze, eyes closing as the simple flavors hit him. His breath shook. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Keanu let him have that silence. He ate a few bites of his own meal, unhurried and calm, giving Miguel the space to remember what nourishment felt like. Around them, the diner continued to hum with quiet whispers and stolen glances, but their booth felt entirely separate, an island of stillness in the midst of something beginning to shift. After a few minutes, when Miguel had finally stopped shaking and settled into the small, steady rhythm of eating, Keanu looked at him gently. "What's your story?" "Miguel?" Miguel set down his fork, his hands folded in his lap. He breathed in slowly, as if preparing himself to unlock a door he had kept shut for years. Miguel stared down at the plate for a long moment, gathering thoughts that had been buried beneath fatigue and silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but steady, shaped by memories both warm and painful. "I wasn't always like this," he began. "I used to have a life. A good one, actually." Keanu didn't interrupt. He sat still, his attention calm and unwavering, giving Miguel the space to continue. "I was a chef," Miguel said. "Not a famous one, not someone with a big restaurant or anything like that. But I had a food truck. Alvarez Cocina. Maybe you've seen those little gold stickers they give out. At the local festivals, I won a few. People used to line up for my chili verde and my breakfast burritos. It wasn't much, but it was mine." There was pride in his voice, but it was the fragile kind that reappeared only when someone bothered to ask. "My wife, Elena, she helped me run it. She handled the business stuff. I handled the cooking. We were a good team." A faint smile crossed his lips. Then it faded. "She got sick 3 years ago. Cancer. It was fast. Too fast." He paused, looking out the window as if the memory played somewhere outside. "I sold the truck to pay for treatment. Sold our house. Sold everything except a few clothes and a knife my father gave me. I would have sold my own shadow if it could have bought her another month. But it didn't matter. She was gone before we even understood what was happening." Keanu's eyes softened. "I'm sorry." Miguel nodded once, accepting the quiet sympathy. "After she passed, I lost myself. I tried to get work in kitchens again, but I wasn't the same. I couldn't focus. I burned things, forgot orders. My hands shook. Some nights I drank to sleep. Some nights I didn't sleep at all. Eventually, no one wanted to hire me, and I don't blame them. He took another bite slower this time, as if grounding himself again. One night, my apartment caught fire. Faulty wiring. Burned through the living room and the kitchen. Lost the few things I had left. That was the final fall. After that, there was nowhere to go. I ended up at the train station, then the streets. He lifted his gaze, eyes tired but clearer than before. I guess that's how someone becomes invisible. Not all at once, just piece by piece. For a moment, neither man spoke. The diner's noise faded into the background, turning into a muted hum behind the weight of Miguel's story. Keanu leaned slightly forward. Miguel, he asked quietly, "Do you still cook?" Miguel breathed out a sound almost like a laugh, but far more filled with ache. "Every day," he said. "Every day." In my head. Keanu let Miguel's words settle into the air between them, giving them the weight they deserved. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward. It was reflective, the kind of silence that allowed a man to breathe after speaking truths he hadn't voiced in years. Miguel took another small bite of his egg, slower now, but more certain, as though the act itself steadied him. Keanu rested his hands around his warm cup of water. "When you think about cooking," he asked, "is it the food you miss or the life that came with it?" Miguel looked up, surprised by the question. He thought about it for several seconds before answering. "Both," he said, "but mostly the feeling. When I cooked, I felt useful, like I was giving people something good, a bit of comfort, a bit of home. Food has a way of doing that." His voice softened even more. "When Elena and I ran the truck, people laughed there. Families came every weekend. I could tell when someone was having a bad day because they always ordered the spicy stuff. I liked being part of their lives, even in tiny moments." He swallowed. "I haven't felt like I mattered to anyone in a long time." Keanu nodded slowly. "You matter right now." Miguel blinked at him, almost startled. "Why would you say that?" "Because you're here," Keanu said. "You're sharing your story, and stories matter. People matter, even when they think no one sees them." Miguel let out a shaky breath. No one had spoken to him that way in years, not with pity, not with impatience, with respect. Keanu lifted his fork. "Your wife," he asked gently, "did she like your cooking?" Miguel's expression softened into something almost tender. "She loved it. She said my food tasted like hope. I never understood what she meant until after she was gone. Hope has a flavor, I guess, and I lost it for a long time." The words hit something inside Keanu. He thought of the losses in his own life, the grief he carried quietly, the way he too understood how pain could carve out a space so wide it felt endless. He didn't speak of it, but the empathy in his expression said enough. The door of the diner opened, letting in another gust of cool wind. A few heads turned, but the moment at the booth didn't break. It only deepened. Keanu set down his fork and folded his hands. "Miguel," he said softly, "if you had the chance to cook again, really cook, what would you make first?" Miguel didn't hesitate this time. "A pot of chile verde," he answered, "the way Elena taught me, with cloves and onion and slow-roasted pork, served with warm tortillas, something simple but alive." He paused, then added, "Something that reminds me I'm still here." Keanu nodded, as if receiving an answer he had been waiting for. The room around them kept moving, unaware of the turning point unfolding at the quiet booth by the window. A meal had been served, a story had been spoken, and something long dormant in Miguel had begun to stir again. While Miguel finished the last bites of his simple meal, the teenager who had snapped their photo earlier sat outside on a bench, his phone still glowing in his hands. He typed with the speed of someone who knew he was catching something unusual at exactly the right time. The caption he wrote was short, almost casual, but it held a spark. "Keanu Reeves just invited a homeless man to lunch at our restaurant. Respect." He hit post without thinking twice. Within minutes, the photo began to move, first among his friends, then among strangers who recognized the man at the booth. It spread to a local page, then someone shared it on a popular film forum. From there, it took flight gathering reactions faster than the teenager could refresh his screen. Inside the diner, Keanu had no idea that hundreds of people were already sharing the moment he had treated as nothing more than basic human decency. He wasn't looking for attention. He wasn't trying to make a statement. He was simply making space for a man who had gone too long without any. Miguel set his fork down, the last trace of warmth from the meal lingering on his face. His shoulders were still hunched, but something in his posture had softened, as if the food had filled more than just his stomach. It had reached something deeper. "Thank you," Miguel said quietly. "I don't even know how to begin to repay this." "You don't need to repay anything," Keanu replied. "Just finish eating." The waitress brought the bill to the table, but she placed it in front of Keanu without hesitation. Her hands didn't shake this time. Instead, she offered a gentle smile to Miguel before stepping away. The earlier tension she had carried seemed to melt from her face. Keanu slid his card into the check holder. There was no ceremony to it, no grand gesture. Just a quiet finality, as if he were closing the door on the kind of world that looked away from people like Miguel. Outside, the photo continued climbing through feeds and timelines. Comments poured in. That's how a real person behaves. This is why people love Keanu Reeves. Help each other. It isn't that hard, but inside the diner, none of this mattered yet. Not to Keanu, not to Miguel. Their conversation remained deeper and smaller than anything the internet could capture. When the card was returned, Keanu stood and reached across the table. "Miguel," he said, "I'm glad we met today." Miguel rose slowly, unsure what came next. The warmth from the food was fading, replaced by the familiar uncertainty of what waited outside. But before he could step away, Keanu held out his hand. "I want to ask you something," Keanu said, "and I hope you'll think about it." Miguel's brows pulled together. "What is it?" Keanu hesitated only a second. "Can you meet me tomorrow at 9, at the Plaza Cafe kitchen?" Miguel blinked at Keanu, unsure he had heard correctly. The Plaza Cafe was one of Santa Fe's busiest breakfast spots, a place known for its long lines and its bustling kitchen. It wasn't the kind of restaurant that invited homeless men through the back door, let alone offered them opportunities. Miguel's voice wavered. "The kitchen?" he asked. Keanu nodded. "A friend of mine owns the place. I made a call earlier while you were eating. He's willing to let you come in, meet the staff, maybe show them a little of what you used to do." Miguel stared at him as though the floor beneath his feet had shifted. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Keanu answered, "and I believe in second chances." Miguel's throat tightened. For a moment words failed him, but his eyes said everything. Gratitude, fear, hope fighting its way through the cracks of a man who hadn't dared to feel it in years. "I don't have clothes for something like that," Miguel whispered. "I don't even have a place to clean up properly. I don't want to embarrass you." "You won't," Keanu said, his voice steady. "Come as you are." Miguel looked away, overwhelmed. "Are you serious?" "Very." It was such a simple word, but for Miguel it carried the weight of a lifeline. Keanu extended his hand again, offering the same calm reassurance he had shown since the moment he stepped between Miguel and the diner's door. Miguel hesitated only a heartbeat before reaching out and shaking it. His grip was light, almost fragile, but it held sincerity. When they finally stepped outside the restaurant, the chilly afternoon air brushed against their faces. The plaza was still busy, but now more eyes were turning their way. Some recognized Keanu instantly. Others recognized Miguel from the streets. The contrast between the two men was impossible to ignore, yet in this moment they seemed connected by something deeper than circumstance. A woman near the entrance leaned toward her husband. "Is that the guy from the photo going around?" he whispered. "Already?" she asked. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of a phone buzzing repeatedly inside someone's pocket. The story was spreading faster than anyone could anticipate. Keanu didn't check his phone. He didn't need to. What mattered most was walking beside Miguel as they exited the diner. Not ahead of him, not behind him, beside him. At the edge of the plaza, Miguel stopped. His voice was quiet but certain. "If I show up tomorrow, what happens then?" Keanu met his eyes. "Then we'll see what doors open." Miguel inhaled a slow breath, letting it steady him. "All right, I'll be there." Keanu smiled a small nod of approval. "Good. 9 sharp." As they parted ways, one man returning to a modest rental home, the other to the quiet corner of the train station, neither of them realized that the world had already begun watching. What started as a private meal was becoming something larger, something neither one of them could stop now. As Miguel walked away from the plaza, the cold wind pressed against his worn jacket. The food in his stomach warmed him, but the conversation with Keanu warmed something much deeper. Each step felt unreal, as though he were moving through a dream he might wake from at any moment. He kept replaying the same words in his mind. "Come as you are." No one had said something like that to him in years. He glanced back once just to make sure the moment hadn't vanished. Keanu was still there, speaking quietly to the hostess before slipping into the flow of pedestrians and disappearing down the street. No spotlight, no entourage, just a man who meant what he said. Miguel pulled his jacket tighter and headed toward the train station, unaware of the storm building behind him. Across town, inside a bustling coffee shop, a young barista scrolled through her phone between customers. The photo of Keanu and Miguel appeared on her screen. She read the caption, once smiled, then turned her phone toward her coworker. "Look at this." Her coworker leaned over. "No way." "That really him, seems like it." Within seconds, they shared it. Their friends shared it, and their friends' friends shared it. The moment passed from one device to another, traveling like electricity through wires. Reddit threads lit up. Instagram stories multiplied. A popular Santa Fe travel blogger reposted it, adding her own caption. "Kindness still exists. Let's spread this." By early evening, national entertainment accounts began picking it up. Fans commented with heart emojis, disbelief, admiration. Others shared their own sightings of Keanu being kind over the years. "He's the real deal. He always has been. Protect this man at all costs." While the internet buzzed, Keanu remained blissfully unaware. He had returned to his small rental home, where he warmed leftover tea on the stove and sat beside the window, watching the light fade over the mountains. He was thinking about Miguel, about the way the man's hands shook when he picked up the tortilla, about the long pause before he spoke of his wife. Keanu didn't know what tomorrow would hold. Maybe the kitchen would welcome Miguel. Maybe they wouldn't. But he wanted to give the man a chance, a real one, not a gesture, not a moment for show, a doorway Miguel could choose to walk through. Back at the train station, Miguel settled against the wall he usually slept by. The air was colder now, but he didn't curl into himself the way he normally did. His mind was too full, of food, of conversation, of possibility. He looked at his hands, weathered, calloused, cracked by winter air, and wondered if they could still hold a knife the way they once did. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, 9 sharp. And far beyond Santa Fe, the world kept sharing the photo. A simple act of kindness, frozen in time, now carried by thousands of strangers. But the story ahead wasn't about the photo. It was about what would happen when 2 men stepped into a kitchen the next morning. Miguel didn't sleep much that night. The cold beneath the overpass crept through the thin blanket he carried, but it wasn't the temperature that kept him awake. It was the promise of morning. He lay on his side, watching headlights glide beneath the concrete beams, listening to the distant hum of traffic as he repeated the same words to himself. 9 sharp. He turned them over in his mind like a stone he hadn't touched in years, a stone called hope. He had forgotten what it felt like, how heavy it could be, how bright it could burn when it returned unexpectedly. Before dawn, he rose from the cardboard and blanket that made his temporary bed and headed to the public restroom near the small bus stop. The flickering fluorescent light buzzed above him as he scrubbed his hands and face with cold water. He splashed his hair, combed it with his fingers, wiped the dirt from beneath his nails. He didn't look transformed when he finally stood straight again, but he looked determined. He walked toward the Plaza Cafe, his steps slow but steady. The sun was just beginning to rise, spilling faint streaks of gold over the adobe rooftops. A delivery truck rumbled by. The scent of roasted beans drifted from a nearby cafe. Morning belonged to people with routines, people with places to be. Miguel tried to imagine himself among them again. When he reached the back entrance of the Plaza Cafe kitchen, he hesitated. The steel door loomed in front of him like a gate to a world he had once belonged to, but had been exiled from. His palms grew damp. His breath came shallow. What if they laughed? What if they didn't want him? What if Keanu had only meant it as kindness, not a real chance? He shoved the last thought aside. Keanu wasn't that kind of man. Even Miguel, who knew him only for a few hours, understood that. He lifted his hand and knocked. Inside the kitchen was already alive. Pots clanged, water hissed from faucets. The rhythmic chop of knives hit cutting boards. A young line cook opened the door, expecting an early delivery. Instead, he found Miguel standing there, clothes worn but clean as he could make them. Can I help you?" the cook asked, confused. Miguel cleared his throat. "I'm here to meet the owner and the staff. Keanu Reeves told me to come." The cook blinked, stunned by the name. Before he could respond, the head chef, a tall man with a trimmed beard and tired eyes, stepped forward. "What's going on?" The young cook gestured to Miguel helplessly. "He says Keanu Reeves sent him." The head chef raised an eyebrow. "Keanu Reeves?" And then the kitchen door from the dining room opened. Keanu walked in calm and quiet, just as he had promised. The entire kitchen seemed to pause the moment Keanu stepped through the swinging door. The dishwasher stopped loading trays. The sauté cook froze with a pan in midair. Even the old radio that always played morning ranchera music suddenly felt too loud. Keanu gave a small nod to the staff, humble, as always, as if he hadn't just silenced an entire room by simply walking into it. "Morning," he said quietly. The head chef straightened his apron, suddenly aware of how messy the prep table behind him looked. "Mr. Reeves, we weren't expecting you this early. I wanted to make sure Miguel found the place," Keanu said, glancing back at the man standing uncertainly at the doorway. "He walked here." Miguel lowered his eyes, unsure if the staff was judging him or waiting for him to justify his presence. Keanu stepped closer to the head chef. "This is Miguel Alvarez," he said. "He used to run a food truck in town. He hasn't been able to work for a while, but he deserves a chance to show you what he can do." The chef folded his arms, not dismissive, but cautious. He had run kitchens long enough to know that charity didn't translate into skill. "You're asking me to hire him." "I'm asking you to give him a fair shot," Keanu replied, his voice steady. "No special treatment, just a test. If he succeeds, great. If not, at least he tried." The head chef looked at Miguel carefully. There was dirt beneath his nails, despite his attempts to clean up. His clothes were worn frayed at the edges. His posture was defensive, but beneath the nervousness, the chef saw something else. A spark. A memory of confidence that had been buried, not extinguished. "Do you know your way around a kitchen?" the chef asked. Miguel nodded. "Yes, I used to be good." "This isn't an easy place to work," the chef warned him. Miguel met his eyes for the first time. "I don't want easy. I just want a chance." The head chef held the stare for a moment, then turned to one of his line cooks. "Set him up at Station 3, give him a knife, and get him the recipe for the breakfast chile." Miguel's breath hitched. Not fear, gratitude. Keanu stepped back, letting the moment belong to Miguel now. As Miguel moved toward the prep station, the kitchen staff parted instinctively to make a path for him. Some were skeptical, some curious. But none of them spoke against the decision. Not with Keanu standing in the room, not with Miguel holding his shoulders a little straighter than when he arrived. Keanu gave Miguel one last reassuring nod. "Take your time," he said softly. Miguel swallowed. "I won't waste this." The head chef watched them both. "We'll see what you can do," he said. Miguel didn't flinch. "Yes, chef." And with that, the test began. Station 3 was a small corner of the large, bustling kitchen, but to Miguel it felt like stepping onto a stage he hadn't set foot on in years. A cutting board sat before him. A chef's knife rested neatly beside it. The recipe card for the breakfast chile lay tucked under a metal clip. Simple ingredients were arranged in small bowls: roasted green chilies, diced onions, garlic, cilantro, and soft potatoes waiting to be cubed. His hands hovered over the knife for a moment. They trembled slightly, memories rushing back before he could contain them. He breathed deeply, letting the familiar scent of roasted chiles pull him into a world he once lived in every day. Then he began. He chopped the onions with slow, deliberate strokes, the rhythm awkward at first, but with each movement his body remembered. The muscle memory returned like an old friend knocking at a forgotten door. His grip steadied, his shoulders relaxed, his breathing deepened. Soon the knife moved with precision. Clean cuts, uniform pieces. The sound of blade on board grew steady, confident. The line cooks nearby pretended not to stare, but they exchanged glances with raised eyebrows. They had expected hesitation. They had expected clumsiness. What they saw instead was a man reclaiming a piece of himself with every stroke of the knife. The head chef approached, watching without speaking. Miguel moved next to the stove. He heated the pan, added oil, then onions. They sizzled instantly, filling the air with a rich, warm aroma. He added garlic and potatoes, stirring with practiced ease. When he poured in the green chiles, something in his expression softened, as if part of his soul had stirred inside the pot. The chef leaned in, arms crossed. He wasn't looking for perfection. He was looking for understanding. Technique could be taught, but connection to the food that couldn't be faked. Miguel tasted the mixture, adjusted the salt, added a small pinch of oregano from memory, then stepped back. The kitchen quieted slightly, noticing the shift in his posture. He looked like someone who belonged. "Let me try," the head chef said. Miguel handed him a spoon. His heart pounded. The chef tasted it, closed his eyes, held still. A very long pause followed. When he finally opened his eyes, he looked directly at Miguel. "You still got it." The words hit Miguel harder than he expected. His throat tightened, his chest warmed. He nodded, but the emotion behind his eyes revealed how much the sentence meant to him, how much he had needed someone to say it again after all these years. The chef placed the spoon down. "Stay for the rest of the morning. If it goes well, stay the week." Miguel exhaled the sound almost like a quiet sob of relief. "Thank you," he whispered. As the kitchen returned to motion, Miguel looked around, seeing not judgment, but possibility. And Keanu, who had watched long enough to see the spark return to Miguel's eyes, slipped out the back door without a word, leaving no cameras, no trail, no expectation of praise. Just a man who believed Miguel could matter again. By the third morning, the Plaza Cafe kitchen felt different. Not louder, not busier, just different. The cooks moved with their usual rhythm. The pans hissed, the ovens roared, but something new lingered in the air. A quiet respect for the man at Station 3. Miguel had shown up early every day since his test. Each time he arrived with clean hands, damp hair from the restroom sink, and a determination that surprised even him. He moved carefully, always checking twice before seasoning, always pausing to steady himself before presenting a dish. The nerves never fully left him, but something else took root beside them. Confidence. On the third day, the head chef walked over to him during a lull in the breakfast rush. "You're holding your own," the chef said. "Most people fold in this kitchen." Miguel looked up, startled by the compliment. "I'm trying, chef." "No," the chef corrected him. "You're doing." Those words alone might have carried him through the week, but the world outside the kitchen was already changing in ways he couldn't imagine. While Miguel chopped onions for the lunch prep, the front-of-house staff gathered near the host stand, reading the morning's paper. Bold letters on the front page of the local section drew every eye. Keanu Reeves helps homeless man return to kitchen. A grainy version of the viral photo was printed beside the headline. The article beneath it detailed the moment at the Rojo table, the invitation to lunch, and rumors that Keanu had arranged for Miguel to work in a kitchen again. It didn't reveal the restaurant out of courtesy, but residents of Santa Fe could guess easily. One waitress passed the paper to another server. "I've seen him sleeping by the station for months," she said quietly. "Never knew he could cook." The busboy who had overheard Miguel's introduction to the staff whispered, "Did you see the comments online? People are saying he deserves a second chance." The cafe owner entered the building a few minutes later, holding his own copy of the newspaper. He approached Keanu, who had stopped by the dining room entrance, to greet him before stepping out for the day. "You didn't tell me this would get press," the owner said. Keanu gave a small shrug. I didn't think it would. Well, the owner replied, motioning to the headline. Keanu glanced at it briefly, then shook his head. This shouldn't be about me. It's Miguel's story. The owner raised an eyebrow. You know the media won't see it that way. Then they won't hear from me, Keanu said. Let them talk. I'm not giving interviews. And he meant it. As he stepped outside, the crisp morning air met him with whispers of recognition from passers-by. Someone lifted a phone. Someone else waved. Keanu offered polite nods, but it kept walking. Behind him, inside the cafe, Miguel continued cooking, unaware that the world was already learning his name. By midday, the ripple had reached the Rojo table, the very diner where Miguel had been turned away only days before. The manager stood behind the counter, staring at the same newspaper headline everyone else in town was talking about. His employees whispered nearby, exchanging glances he couldn't ignore. He instinctively touched the apron around his waist. I didn't mean to treat him cruelly, he muttered under his breath. I was following policy, but policy didn't feel like an excuse anymore. Customers who recognized the place from the background of the viral photo began asking questions. Some were gentle, some were not. Isn't this where that happened? Do you still send people away? Have you changed anything since then? The manager felt the pressure building. The viral moment didn't just capture a celebrity doing something kind, it captured a business turning someone away. He didn't want to be remembered for that. He didn't want his restaurant associated with coldness in a moment that had become a symbol of compassion. So after closing that evening, he gathered the staff around the front tables. We're starting something new, he announced. A pay-it-forward table. One table reserved every night for someone in need. Someone who can't afford a meal but deserves one. The staff looked surprised. Who pays for it? A waitress asked. We do, the manager said. All of us, together. And just like that, a small but meaningful shift began inside the walls of the place where Miguel's story had almost ended. Across the city, another unexpected door opened for him. A local charity director knocked on the Plaza Cafe's office door. She spoke with the owner, then asked to meet Miguel. When he stepped out of the kitchen apron dusted with flour, she introduced herself with a warm smile. I've heard a lot about you, she said. More importantly, I've heard what you've been doing these past few days. We have transitional housing available. Small rooms, but clean and safe. If you're interested, we'd like to place you immediately. Miguel stared at her as if she'd spoken in another language. He opened his mouth to answer, but the words caught. The director continued. There's a deposit, but someone already offered to cover it. Keanu had slipped into the building earlier, unnoticed by most. Only the owner saw him leave quickly after signing the papers, offering no explanation and no request for credit. Miguel wiped a hand over his face. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, the director replied. Just come tonight. Your room is ready. When she left, the head chef walked over to Miguel. You all right? Miguel nodded, but tears threatened the edges of his eyes. I think so. I just never thought things like this could still happen to me. The chef placed a hand on his shoulder. Maybe they're happening because you're earning them. And Miguel believed that more in this moment than he had believed anything in years. That evening, after the kitchen closed and the last pans were scrubbed clean, Miguel stepped outside into the cool Santa Fe air. The sky overhead had deepened into a dark blue scattered with early stars. He held a small slip of paper with the charity director's handwriting and address for his new room, his new beginning. For a long time he stared at it, afraid to believe it was real. At that same hour, Keanu walked quietly through the town square unnoticed beneath a simple cap and coat. He wasn't there for attention or to admire the attention swirling online. He came for something else, something steadier, something true. He stood near one of the adobe walls watching people pass. Parents lifted tired children. Artists carried canvases wrapped in cloth. Musicians tuned guitars while waiting for the late-night crowd. It was a scene he loved, life happening without pretense, unfiltered and human. Then he noticed something unusual. People were looking, not at him, not at their phones, at each other. A young woman approached a homeless man sitting by the fountain. Instead of walking past, she knelt and asked him his name. An older couple handed a bag of warm pastries to a man who usually sat alone near the corner market. A barista walked out of the cafe holding a cup of hot chocolate and placed it gently into the hands of a shivering teenager. It wasn't spectacle. It wasn't charity for recognition. It was quiet human connection. The ripple had begun. Keanu watched not with pride, but with gratitude. Miguel wasn't the only one returning to visibility. Others, too, were being seen, really seen for the first time in a long time. Across the plaza, two men talked in hushed tones. "That guy," one said, pointing to the newspaper in his hand, the one Keanu helped. "I think I've seen him before. They say he cooks," the other replied. "Maybe he'll get back on his feet." For once, the story wasn't about scandal or celebrity drama. It was about possibility. About the idea that people could fall and still find hands willing to lift them again. Later that night, Miguel arrived at the small transitional housing building. A warm porch light glowed above the door. When he stepped inside, the woman at the desk handed him a key. "Room 12, she said gently. "Welcome." Miguel walked down the narrow hallway, heart pounding. Room 12 was simple, just a single bed, a dresser, a lamp, and a small bathroom. But to Miguel, it felt like stepping into the first safe place he had known in years. He sat on the edge of the bed, touching the blanket gently. Tears came slow at first, then faster, until he covered his face with both hands. Not from sadness, not from fear, from relief. Outside, the sound of a passing car drifted in through the window. Inside, Miguel breathed deeply and whispered, "I still matter." Across town, Keanu stepped into the night, with the same hope quietly settling in his chest. And Santa Fe, one act of kindness at a time, began to feel different. The Plaza Cafe kitchen buzzed with its usual evening energy. Pots simmered on the stovetop, knives tapped in steady rhythms, and the warm smell of roasted peppers and garlic filled the air. Miguel moved through the space with more confidence, now navigating between cooks as they plated dishes for the dinner rush. The staff had begun trusting him, asking for his help, even joking with him during slower moments. But some wounds lived beneath the surface, waiting for the wrong moment to rise. It happened without warning. Miguel reached for a chef's knife from the magnetic strip above his station. His fingers brushed the handle, slipped slightly from the condensation on his skin, and the knife tumbled. Metal clattered violently against the tile floor. The sound sliced through the kitchen. The cooks paused. Someone turned down a stovetop burner. The radio crackled in the sudden tension. Miguel didn't bend down to pick up the knife. He didn't move at all. He stood frozen breath, trapped in his chest, eyes locked on the knife, as if it were something dangerous, something alive. His hands trembled uncontrollably, his face drained of color. The air around him grew tight, as if even oxygen was afraid to approach him. Miguel, the head chef, called from across the room, "You okay?" But he wasn't. He couldn't answer. He couldn't even blink. His chest felt crushed, like someone was pushing a weight against him. The clang of metal echoed over and over in his mind, blending with memories he had tried to bury. His vision blurred at the edges. One of the line cooks stepped closer, concerned. "Miguel, man, are you all right?" Still nothing. Then the shaking grew worse. His breath finally broke free in short, shallow gasps. The room spun. The noise of the kitchen swelled and overlapped. Someone reached for him, but he stumbled backwards, pressing his back against the counter for support. He slid down until he was sitting on the floor, knees drawn close, hands gripping his temples. A panic attack, sharp, fast, overwhelming. The head chef snapped into action. "Give him space," he ordered. "Clear the area." The cooks stepped away, uncertain and shaken themselves. They had seen stress before, exhaustion before, even anger before, but not this. Not a collapse that seemed born from a place deeper than fatigue. Miguel squeezed his eyes shut, trying to force the memories out. The fire, the screams, the heat, the moment everything he built and someone he cared for was swallowed in flame. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't escape the memory he had avoided for so long. The door at the back of the kitchen opened a few minutes later. Keanu stepped inside, quietly drawn by the commotion. The head chef approached him and whispered, "Something's wrong." He dropped a knife and just fell apart. Keanu nodded once, his expression solemn. "I'll talk to him," he said, and he walked toward the man curled on the floor, another soul battling ghosts too heavy to carry alone. Keanu approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. The kitchen sounds had softened to a respectful hush, as though the entire staff understood that something delicate was unfolding. Miguel kept his eyes closed, still fighting for steady breaths, his chest rising and falling in uneven waves. Keanu crouched beside him and spoke in a calm, low tone. "Miguel, I'm here." The words seemed to reach him through the fog. Miguel didn't look up, but his breathing shifted ever so slightly. His hands loosened from where they pressed against his temples. "Take your time," Keanu said. "There's no rush. Just breathe." Miguel focused on that word, breathe. He drew air in, shakily held it, then released it through trembling lips. Again and again. Slowly the room came back into focus. The spinning eased, the panic loosened its grip, though it still hovered like a shadow waiting to return. After a long minute, Miguel whispered, "Sorry." Keanu shook his head gently. "You don't need to apologize." Miguel swallowed, embarrassed, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," Keanu said. "You had a moment. Everyone has them." Miguel's eyes finally lifted. Behind them was a storm of guilt and exhaustion. "Not like this," he murmured. "Not this bad." Keanu lowered himself to sit fully on the floor beside him, legs crossed back against the counter. His presence was steady, unmoving. "You're not alone," he said softly. The head chef stood at a distance, arms folded, watching with concern. He wanted to step closer, but sensed that this was not a moment for him to enter. The other cooks kept working quietly, though their eyes shifted often toward the two men on the floor. Miguel drew in another slow breath. "The sound," he said at last, "of the knife hitting the tile. It was the same sound I heard that night." Keanu didn't interrupt. Miguel's voice trembled. "The fire, the food truck. I couldn't save him." A quiet pulse moved through the room. Even cooks who couldn't hear the full words felt the weight of his confession. Keanu turned his head slightly. "Save who?" Miguel looked down at his shaking hands. "My apprentice, Mateo. He was only 20. He worked with me after school, wanted to be a chef someday." His voice faltered. He was inside when the truck caught fire. "I tried to pull him out, but the smoke, the flames, I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't fast enough." The pain in his eyes was raw, carved deep by years of carrying a burden alone. "Miguel," Keanu said quietly, "that wasn't your fault." Miguel broke on a whisper. "I was responsible for him." Keanu let silence sit between them for a moment, not a cold silence, but a compassionate one, the kind that makes space for grief rather than hiding it away. Finally, he spoke. "We all carry things. Some we chose, some we didn't." Miguel's breath shuddered, but he listened. For the first time in years, someone wasn't telling him to move on. Someone was sitting beside him in the weight of it. Miguel rested his head against the counter behind him, exhaustion pulling at every line in his face. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I should have closed early that day. I saw the loose wire. I ignored it. I thought I'd fix it after the rush. If I hadn't been careless, Mateo would still be alive." His voice cracked at the end, and he pressed a hand over his mouth to steady himself. Keanu remained still, absorbing every word with quiet sincerity. "You made a mistake," he said gently. "A terrible one, a painful one. But you didn't choose the fire. You didn't choose the outcome. Responsibility doesn't mean blame." Miguel shook his head. "Try telling that to his parents." Keanu inhaled slowly. "I've carried guilt too," he said. The statement was simple, but it carried a gravity that made Miguel look up. Loss makes you think you caused everything. It makes you believe you could have changed the past if you had just done one thing differently. Miguel studied his face. "How did you live with it?" I didn't, Keanu said softly. Not at first. I fought it. I hid from it. But eventually I learned something. Grief doesn't leave, but it becomes something you can walk with. Something that shapes you without destroying you. He paused, giving Miguel space to absorb the words. You cared about that young man, Keanu continued, and caring doesn't make you guilty, it makes you human. Miguel let out a long, uneven breath, tears welling again, quieter this time. Less frantic, more like a release he didn't know he needed. I've never talked about it, he whispered. Not once. I thought if I said it out loud, it would make it real. Keanu placed a steady hand on his shoulder. It was already real. Talking about it doesn't make it worse. It helps you stop carrying it alone. The kitchen around them stayed respectfully distant, but the staff could sense something shifting. The man who had been a mystery, who worked hard but kept to himself, was opening a door he had kept locked for years. Miguel wiped his face, grounding himself. Why are you helping me this much? Keanu didn't hesitate. Because someone once sat with me when I felt like this. Because we're all just trying to find our way back after life knocks us down. And because you deserve a chance to move forward, not live in the ashes. Miguel nodded slowly. A fragile tentative strength flickered in his eyes. I want to try, he said. That's all you need to do, Keanu replied. Try, and I'll walk with you as long as you keep going. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside Miguel, a beginning inside all the broken parts. And for Keanu, the connection reminded him of something he had long believed: healing doesn't come from fame or fortune. It comes from sitting beside someone in their darkest moment and refusing to leave. News traveled fast through Santa Fe, faster than anyone expected. By the end of the week, Miguel's story was no longer just a headline or a viral image. It had become a conversation. In coffee shops, in grocery store lines, in city hall corridors. People spoke of second chances, dignity, and how easily a life could be pushed off course. And they spoke of how one quiet moment of compassion had set something larger in motion. It wasn't long before Santa Fe's mayor asked to meet Keanu. The request wasn't framed as publicity. It wasn't about spotlight or ceremony. The message delivered to the Plaza Cafe owner was simple. The mayor wanted to talk about possibilities. When Keanu arrived at City Hall, he walked through the lobby, unnoticed except for the security guard, who gave him a polite nod. He preferred it that way. Fame was never the point, and he carried himself lightly, blending in whenever possible. A staff member led him to a modest conference room where the mayor waited, sleeves rolled up, paperwork scattered on the table. Mr. Reeves, the mayor, said, shaking his hand warmly, "Thank you for coming. What you did for Miguel." It meant something to this town. Keanu sat quietly. What I did was share a meal, he said. He did the rest. The mayor studied him for a moment, surprised by the humility. Most people wouldn't have stopped at all. And now the community is talking about homelessness in a way they haven't in years. I think we can build on that. Keanu leaned back, considering. If we're going to build something, he said, let's make it real, not symbolic. The mayor nodded, intrigued. What do you have in mind? Keanu took a moment before responding. There are people like Miguel all over this city, skilled, experienced, forgotten. What if we created a place where they could learn again, cook again, work again, not as charity, but as training? The mayor's eyes sharpened with interest. You're thinking job development? I'm thinking mentorship, Keanu replied. A kitchen, a program run by chefs willing to guide people who need a second start. Call it something simple, something that says what we're trying to do. He paused. Second spoon. The mayor repeated the phrase, softly letting it settle. Second spoon, he said again. I like it. The idea grew as they talked an initiative that would partner local restaurants with people experiencing homelessness, giving them training, mentorship, and the dignity of skill. A small kitchen for daily workshops, a community dining room where trainees could serve affordable meals, a network of chefs who would offer short apprenticeships. But ideas needed funding. When the mayor presented the concept to the city council later that week, hesitation filled the room. Budgets were tight, programs already stretched thin. A new initiative sounded risky. Keanu listened as they weighed the obstacles. When they finished, he spoke with the same quiet resolve that had stopped a diner in its tracks. "I'll fund the first year." The room fell silent. He didn't raise his voice or make a grand gesture. He simply offered the support without attachment, without expectation of praise. And that changed the tone completely. A council member leaned forward. "If you're willing to carry the startup cost, we can approve the pilot." The mayor smiled. Second spoon begins. Once the council approved the pilot, the city moved quickly. A small, unused community kitchen on the south side of Santa Fe was identified as the ideal location. It had once served as a gathering space for neighborhood potlucks and cultural events, but years of neglect had left it dusty, outdated, and forgotten. Perfect for a fresh start. Keanu visited the building quietly at dawn, long before most city workers arrived. The old metal door groaned when he pushed it open. The floors were cracked. The sink was rusted. The stove looked like it had survived 2 decades of burned casseroles. But he saw potential not in the building itself, but in the lives it could change. He ran a hand along the counter and imagined Miguel standing there, teaching someone how to slice onions or season broth. He pictured a small crowd, gathered at mismatched tables, sharing meals prepared by people rediscovering their purpose. He pictured hope stitched into every corner of this humble room. Later that morning, the mayor and a few staff members arrived. "It's not much," the mayor said, glancing around, "but with renovation, it could be ready in a few months." Keanu nodded. "This will work. Let's keep it simple. Focus on function, not fanfare." The mayor chuckled. "You're the only celebrity I've met who asks for less spotlight." "I'm not here for spotlight," Keanu replied. "Just solutions." Renovation crews were hired. Contractors brought in new appliances, fresh paint, better flooring. A local furniture maker offered to build sturdy wooden tables at a discount after hearing what the space would be used for. Another artist volunteered to paint a mural for the entrance wall, something warm, something that symbolized renewal. While the space transformed, the question remained, who would help run it? The mayor asked Keanu one afternoon, "Do you have someone in mind for leadership, someone who understands kitchens and understands struggle?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "Miguel," the mayor raised his eyebrows. "Do you think he'll accept?" Keanu smiled softly. "I think he needs to be asked." That evening, after Miguel finished his shift at the Plaza Cafe, Keanu met him outside near the back alley. The sun was low, casting soft orange light across the street. Miguel was wiping his hands with a towel when Keanu approached. "I want to talk to you about something," Keanu said. Miguel nodded, attentive but unsure. "The city is starting a program," Keanu continued. "A mentorship kitchen. A place where people who need a second chance can learn cook and rebuild their lives. They want someone who's lived it. Someone who understands what it means to be invisible and to be seen again." Miguel's breath caught. "You're saying me?" "Yes," Keanu said. "If you want it, if you're ready." Miguel stared at the ground, overwhelmed. After a long moment, he lifted his head eyes steady and filled with a quiet fire. "If it means someone else doesn't go invisible," he said softly, "then yes." The morning Miguel decided to reclaim his past was colder than expected. A thin layer of frost clung to the edges of the sidewalks as he walked toward the part of Santa Fe he had avoided for 3 years. His hands were tucked deep into his coat pockets, but the cold didn't bother him. What chilled him more was the weight of the memories he was choosing to face. He had told Keanu only one thing the night before. "There's something I need to do alone." Keanu nodded. "I'll follow from a distance, but only if you want me to." Miguel appreciated that. He wasn't ready to make the journey entirely alone, but he also wasn't ready to talk during it. Some paths required silence. The pawn shop sat on a quiet corner, squeezed between an old laundromat and a mural-covered wall that had begun to fade under the desert sun. The sign above the window buzzed faintly, one letter flickering. Miguel stood outside for a moment, staring at the doorway he had stumbled through, One desperate afternoon with shaking hands and no money, carrying only the one tool that had defined his life, his old chef's knife. He pushed the door open. A bell jingled overhead as he entered. The familiar smell hit him first: dust, metal, and aged wood. Behind the counter stood the same man who had taken the knife years ago, a stout shopkeeper with deep lines across his forehead and a cigarette tucked behind his ear. The owner squinted at him for a long moment. Then his expression changed. "Thought you were dead," the man said. Miguel let out a soft breath of something that wasn't quite a laugh. "Not yet." The owner reached under the counter and pulled out a narrow box, one Miguel recognized immediately. The man placed it down gently. "Someone already paid the fee," he said. "Said you'd be coming for it." The words struck Miguel harder than he expected. He opened the box slowly. Inside rested the knife. The blade was slightly worn, but the wooden handle still held the impression of his grip. The last remaining piece of the life he had, before everything burned. He lifted it carefully, like holding an old friend. "You kept it safe," Miguel whispered. The owner shrugged. "Didn't think anyone else should have it. Tools carry history." Miguel nodded. "This one carries too much." But he still slipped it into the new cloth sheath the pawnshop owner offered him. It felt different now, not as a reminder of failure, but as something reclaimed. As he stepped outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds. He looked down the road toward the outskirts of town, where the ruins of his old food truck still stood behind a chain-link fence. Miguel tightened his grip on the knife. There was one more place he had to go. The path to the old food truck lot felt longer than Miguel remembered. The city slowly thinned behind him until the pavement gave way to rougher ground scattered with gravel and wild tufts of desert grass. The lot sat near an abandoned warehouse, quiet and forgotten. A place people passed without noticing. A place that once held his dream. Now it held only ashes and rust. When Miguel reached the fence, he stopped. Even from a distance, he could see the charred outline of what used to be his pride. The truck's once bright red paint had peeled away, leaving streaks of blackened metal. The service window was caved in. The roof sagged. Nature had started reclaiming the space weeds growing through the cracks in the concrete. He gripped the fence with one hand, breathing slowly. This was the first time he had returned since the fire. For a long moment he didn't move. He let the silence wrap around him, let the memories rise, let the fear settle. Then he exhaled and walked around to the unlocked gate. He pushed it open. Each step toward the truck felt weighted, as if the ground held pieces of the past he had tried to bury. When he reached the side of the truck, he placed a hand on the rusted metal. It was cool under his palm. Once it had been warm from long days of service, smelling of cumin, roasted peppers, and fresh tortillas. Once, this truck had fed crowds, sparked laughter, brought joy. Once, it had felt like home. Miguel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a single white carnation. Simple, unpretentious. It was the kind of flower Mateo used to pick up from the corner shop before their busiest days, saying it brought good luck. Miguel had never believed in luck, but he believed in the boy who carried the flowers. He crouched beside the truck and placed the carnation at the foot of the metal frame. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words trembled with a sorrow that had lived inside him far too long. "I should have come sooner." A soft breeze passed, lifting a small swirl of dust into the air. Miguel closed his eyes. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't expect peace. He simply allowed himself to feel. For the first time since the fire, he didn't run from the memory. He stood inside it, bruised, grieving, but still standing. When he finally rose, he noticed a figure standing near the edge of the lot. Keanu. Not close enough to intrude, not far enough to abandon. Just watching quietly, giving Miguel the space he needed. The distance was deliberate, respectful. Miguel felt gratitude wash over him, not for the presence alone, but for the restraint. He walked toward Keanu slowly. When he reached him, neither man spoke immediately. Miguel finally said, "I think that was the last part I was afraid to face." Keanu nodded gently. You didn't walk away from it. That matters. Miguel looked back at the ruined truck, the sunlight catching the carnation at its base. This isn't where my story ends, he said. No, Keanu answered softly. It's where it starts again. 6 weeks passed, and the transformation of the Second Spoon Kitchen felt nothing short of miraculous. What had once been an abandoned community space had become a warm, bustling culinary home. New tiles gleamed under soft overhead lighting. Counters were polished smooth. The air carried scents of simmering chiles, fresh herbs, and slow-roasted vegetables. A mural stretched across the entrance wall, depicting hands passing a wooden spoon from one to another. Renewal, community, dignity. Opening night arrived with a quiet sense of suspense that rippled through the building. Miguel stood in the kitchen in his clean apron, the chef's knife he had reclaimed safely resting at his workstation. His posture was straight steady, not clouded with the weight that once bent him low. Tonight wasn't about what he had lost. Tonight was about what he was capable of building. Trainees bustled around him. Some were nervous, some were wide-eyed with excitement. Many had come from shelters or transitional housing across Santa Fe. All were here because someone finally believed they deserved a new beginning. Miguel clapped his hands once firm but encouraging. Listen up. We move as a team. We talk as a team. No one falls behind. If you need help, ask. We're here to learn not to be perfect. The trainees nodded. Some smiled. Miguel saw pieces of his old self in every one of them, the fear, the hope, the hunger for a chance. In the corner of the kitchen, away from the cameras gathering outside, Keanu tied an apron around his waist and rolled up his sleeves. He wasn't there as a figurehead or a celebrity guest. He was an extra pair of hands. He moved quietly between stations, checking pots, chopping vegetables, offering calm reassurance when someone's nerves caused them to drop a ladle or oversalt a sauce. Outside, the media had gathered in a cluster. Local stations, regional newspapers, a few national outlets. They weren't there for scandal or spectacle. They were there because something rare was happening, something rooted not in charity, but in empowerment. Inside the kitchen, Miguel intentionally kept the door shut to the dining area. He wanted the trainees focused on their craft, not the flashes of cameras. He called out orders with surprising command. 2 green chile stews up first. Table 3 needs vegetarian plates in 4 minutes. Check the tortillas on the grill, they're almost ready. Confidence carried through his voice. It threaded through the room like an anchor. The trainees listened closely, responding with "Yes, chef," each time. They weren't just learning technique, they were learning presence. As the dinner hour approached, the first guests took their seats. The crowd was a blend of unlikely companions, city council members in clean suits, shelter residents wearing their best donated shirts, restaurant owners, charity leaders, and a few ordinary people from the neighborhood who had supported the idea from the beginning. They were all equal tonight. No one was turned away. No one ate alone. At 6 p.m., the doors officially opened. Miguel stood in the kitchen doorway and watched the dining room fill with warm conversation and anticipation. It felt unreal, yet profoundly right. Keanu stepped beside him and whispered, "Ready?" Miguel nodded, breath steady. "Let's cook." The kitchen came alive the moment the first ticket printed. Miguel snatched it from the rail, scanned it, and called out the order with a clear, steady voice. 2 bowls of red chile pozole, 1 chicken mole, 1 roasted squash plate. Let's move. The trainees snapped into motion, pots clattered, ladles dipped, the aroma of simmering spices filled the air. Miguel hovered between stations, adjusting seasoning here, correcting knife angles there, offering praise when someone nailed a technique they had been struggling with all week. Keanu worked beside them, stationed at prep. He diced onions with quiet focus, occasionally offering a calm nod or a reassuring word to the trainees, whose hands trembled with the weight of opening night pressure. "You're doing great," he told one young man who kept checking his plating. "Just breathe. Cooking is rhythm." The trainee steadied himself, nodded, and continued with renewed confidence. As dishes left the kitchen, the dining room transformed. Conversations softened as people tasted the first plates. A council member leaned back, eyes widening. "This is incredible," he said to a shelter resident seated across from him. The resident smiled shyly, unused to being treated as an equal. Another diner, a woman who lived in one of the transitional housing programs, held her spoon above her bowl for a long moment before taking the first bite. Tears welled in her eyes. "It tastes like home," she whispered. Word spread table to table. The food wasn't just good, it was soulful. It carried the fingerprints of people who had once believed they had nothing left to give. In the kitchen, Miguel felt the shift. The team moved more smoothly. Timing aligned, confidence grew with each plate. For the first time in years, he felt not the crushing weight of leadership, but the joy of it. When the mayor stepped into the kitchen doorway, applause from the dining room followed him. The noise startled the trainees, but Miguel raised a hand. "Stay focused," he said. "We finish strong." His tone wasn't harsh, it was grounding. And it worked. Everyone kept cooking. A few minutes later, the mayor approached Miguel. "They want you to speak," he said gently. Miguel froze. "I can't." "You can," the mayor assured him. "This is your night." Miguel shook his head. "No, tonight is about them," he said, gesturing to the trainees, "and the people eating out there, not me." The mayor accepted his decision and turned to Keanu. "They'll want to hear from you then." Keanu wiped his hands on a towel, untied his apron, and walked toward the dining room. The room rose in applause the moment he appeared, but he lifted a hand for quiet. He didn't give a speech. He didn't talk about himself. He simply said, "This is what hope tastes like." Silence followed. Then the entire room stood. Every diner, every staff member, every trainee watching from the kitchen window. Not for a celebrity, not for fanfare, for change. In the kitchen, Miguel felt something shift deep inside him. Not pride, not relief, belonging. Second Spoon had not just opened its doors, it had opened a future. The week after Second Spoon's opening night felt strangely calm compared to the whirlwind before it. The media coverage softened into thoughtful editorials. Local restaurants reached out with offers to collaborate. Trainees returned with more confidence than they had carried in years. And for the first time since stepping into a kitchen again, Miguel found himself looking forward to each morning instead of fearing it. But something else arrived, something unexpected. One crisp afternoon, as Keanu walked into the office connected to the Second Spoon training kitchen, the program coordinator handed him a stack of envelopes. "These came for you," she said. "We haven't seen anything like it." Keanu frowned lightly. Letters, lots of them. He placed the stack onto a table, surprised by the sheer number. He wasn't used to receiving paper mail anymore. Most people reached out through social media or through the studio. These envelopes felt different, more intentional, more personal. He picked up the first one. A simple white envelope with handwriting that leaned slightly to the right. He opened it carefully, unfolding the lined paper inside. Mr. Reeves began. "I want to tell you something I never had the courage to say to anyone." The letter was from a man in Chicago. His brother had been homeless for nearly 10 years. He wrote about the nights he spent searching for him under viaducts, the shelters he visited, hoping to find him. The guilt of not doing more, the heartbreak of realizing his brother had passed away last winter alone unnoticed. Near the bottom of the letter, one sentence stood out. "Thank you for seeing someone others didn't." Keanu let the words sink into him, not because they praised him, but because they revealed a deeper grief that lived quietly in so many families. He opened a second letter, then a third, then another. One from a woman in New Mexico whose father had once been a celebrated chef before addiction took everything from him. One from a retired social worker who spent 30 years trying to connect people to services, but always felt the world moved too fast to notice the slow collapse of human dignity. One from a former chef who had lost his restaurant during the recession. He wrote, "If Miguel is teaching, I want to stand beside him. Tell me where to go. I want to help." The letters piled like a small mountain on the table, each one carrying its own story of loss, love, regret, or gratitude, each one echoing the same theme: human beings want to be seen. Keanu read quietly for nearly an hour. He wasn't emotional often, at least not visibly, but something about these handwritten messages stirred a place inside him he didn't talk about publicly. A place tied to his own losses, to the people he wished he could have saved, to the grief he carried like a shadow. He gathered the letters into a neat pile. There was someone who needed to read them even more than he did. Miguel was in the training kitchen when Keanu found him, sleeves rolled up, showing a trainee how to hold a ladle without burning their wrist on the steam. He moved with an ease that would have been impossible to imagine months earlier. The kitchen no longer intimidated him. It felt like a place built from his own hands, shaped by his scars and his strength. When the lesson ended, Keanu lifted the stack of letters slightly. "Can we talk?" Miguel nodded and followed him into the small office beside the pantry. The door shut softly behind them. Keanu set the letters on the desk between them. "These came today," he said. "People from all over the country wrote them." Miguel frowned in confusion. "For you?" "For us," Keanu corrected gently. He handed Miguel the first envelope, the letter from the man in Chicago. Miguel unfolded the page and read silently. His eyes traced every line slowly, like each sentence was a step deeper into someone else's grief. When he reached the part about the man's late brother, Miguel stopped breathing for a moment. "He died alone," Miguel whispered, "and his brother still carries this much love for him." Keanu nodded. "People don't stop caring. They just don't always know how to help." Miguel put the letter down carefully, as if it might break in his hands. Keanu passed him the next one, then another, then one more. With each letter, Miguel's shoulders lifted and fell in quiet waves. The stories weren't his, yet they felt familiar. The loneliness, the shame, the longing to be seen again after disappearing from the world's view. Finally, Miguel reached a letter written in firm block handwriting. As he read, his expression changed. The letter came from a former chef named Daniel Ortiz. He wrote about losing his restaurant, sleeping in his car for months, trying to rebuild his life one day at a time. At the bottom, he had written, "If Miguel is teaching at Second Spoon, I want to learn from him. Tell him I'd be honored to stand in any kitchen with him." Miguel stared at that line for a long time. His hands shook slightly, not from panic this time, but from something gentler, something he hadn't felt in years. Respect. Real earned respect. He set the letter down and pressed his palms to his eyes. His voice trembled when he spoke. "I never thought anyone would want to learn from me again." Keanu leaned forward. "You've lived through things most people break under. You're still standing. You're giving people hope just by walking into this building every morning." Miguel lowered his hands, tears streaking his cheeks. "I'm not ashamed of who I am anymore," he said softly. The words hovered in the room, fragile and powerful at once. Keanu placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Good, because who you are is someone this world needs." Miguel nodded, letting the truth of that settle inside him. For the first time in many years, he believed it. Outside the office door, the kitchen clattered with life. Somewhere in that sound of knives chopping pans, sizzling voices, Learning Miguel heard himself again. And that was enough. As Second Spoon settled into its rhythm, something new awakened inside Miguel. Each day he guided trainees through the fundamentals, knife skills, sautéing, seasoning, plating. But there was one lesson he hesitated to teach, one memory he carried but had never revisited in a kitchen since the fire. A dish from his childhood. It wasn't flashy or intricate. It didn't belong on the menu of a fine dining restaurant. It came from a tiny kitchen in his mother's home, simmered in a dented pot over a modest flame. A humble stew of beans, potatoes, green chiles, tomatoes, and slow-cooked pork. A dish his mother said could warm the soul before it warms the stomach. A dish she made when money was tight, when the days were long, when comfort mattered more than anything else. One morning, while the trainees practiced their prep stations, Miguel stood at the back stove, staring at an empty pot. The idea had grown in him for weeks, quietly, stubbornly. Now it felt impossible to ignore. He pulled ingredients from the pantry, beans soaked overnight, fresh chilies, onions, tomatoes, a modest cut of pork shoulder. Nothing fancy, everything honest. As he washed and chopped, memories surfaced: his mother's laughter, the scrape of her wooden spoon against the pot, the warmth of sitting at a cluttered table with family who never cared about perfection, only presence. A trainee named Luis approached cautiously. "Chef, what are you making?" Miguel paused. For a moment he considered brushing the question aside, but something inside him softened. "A dish from my childhood," he said. "Something simple, something true." Soon the aroma filled the kitchen. Trainees lifted their heads, drawn in by the fragrance. It was different from the dishes they usually made. Comforting, familiar, almost nostalgic even to those who had never tasted it. By the time the stew finished simmering, the kitchen had grown quiet. Miguel ladled a small portion into a bowl and tasted it. The flavors were warm, layered, and gentle, exactly as he remembered. His throat tightened unexpectedly. Keanu stepped inside at that moment, having returned from a meeting with the mayor. "Smells incredible," he said, approaching the stove. Miguel offered him a spoonful. Keanu tasted it, let the flavors linger, then nodded slowly. "This is special." Miguel looked down at the pot. "It's a dish my mother used to make when life felt too heavy." Keanu placed the spoon down. "Are you thinking about adding it to the menu?" Miguel hesitated, then answered quietly. "Yes. What will you call it?" Keanu asked. Miguel's voice was soft but steady. "Invisible." Keanu's eyes lifted. "Why that name?" Miguel took a breath, steadying his voice. "Because it's what I felt like for years. Like I didn't exist. Like no one saw me. This dish, it brings me back to a time when I still believed I mattered." Keanu nodded with deep understanding. "Then people need to taste it." The week Miguel introduced Invisible to the trainees, the entire kitchen seemed to buzz with a different kind of anticipation. Second Spoon had already earned a reputation for heart and flavor, but something about this dish felt deeper, almost sacred. The trainees gathered around the stove the following Friday morning, watching Miguel demonstrate each step, slow, deliberate, respectful. "This isn't a fast dish," he told them. "It's patient. It teaches you to listen, to feel, to care." Luis stirred the pot gently. Another trainee, Rosa, added diced tomatoes. The room filled with the aromas of toasted chiles, simmering beans, and tender pork. Someone whispered, "It smells like home," and Miguel felt the words settle warmly in his chest. That afternoon, the team prepared for the first ever Invisible Friday. A chalkboard sign outside read, "Today's feature Invisible, a dish of hope and home." The dining room filled quickly. Families, shelter residents, office workers, local artists, people who had heard of the dish, and people who simply followed the smell drifting out the front door. By the time dinner service began, a line stretched down the sidewalk. Inside the kitchen, Miguel stood ready at the pass. Trainees moved around him in synchronized motion, ladling stew into bowls, adding a garnish of fresh cilantro, wiping the rims clean. The dish didn't require fancy plating. It didn't need decorative swirls or delicate petals. It was honest, generous, and comforting. The first bowls went out. The dining room fell quieter as people tasted the stew. Some closed their eyes, some paused mid-bite. A few wiped their eyes with napkins, embarrassed and surprised that a simple bowl of stew could stir so much emotion. Keanu watched from the back of the room, standing near the wall so as not to draw attention. He didn't need to be in the center. This moment belonged to Miguel and the trainees. An older man at table 6 set down his spoon and whispered to his wife, "I haven't tasted anything like this since my grandmother passed." A young woman, eating alone, smiled softly into her bowl. Two shelter residents leaned across the table, sharing memories of meals cooked by mothers they no longer had. Word traveled fast. By the following week, Invisible had become the single most requested item at Second Spoon. On Fridays, lines formed before the doors opened. People from neighboring towns drove in just to taste what had become more than a dish. It had become a story. One Friday afternoon, a former food critic named Dana Whitford slipped inside unnoticed. She ordered the stew, tasted it, and set her spoon down immediately. She finished the bowl slowly with the quiet reverence of someone witnessing something rare. That night, she published a piece in her column. "This isn't just a dish," she wrote. "It is a life served in a bowl. A memory resurrected, a soul restored. Invisible tastes like a second chance." Miguel read the article twice, unable to speak, because for the first time in years, something he created, something born from pain, loss, and survival, was healing other people. And that was when he realized he was no longer invisible. Second Spoon had started as a quiet idea born from a single moment outside a diner, but within weeks, Santa Fe began to transform in ways no one predicted. The first ripple came from a small cafe 2 blocks away called Sunrise Mesa, owned by a couple who had watched Miguel's story unfold from a distance. One evening, they placed a chalkboard sign outside their door. "Tonight, Second Spoon night. Pay for your meal. Pay for someone else's. Or just come in and sit with us. Everyone deserves a place at the table." Customers lined up before sunset. Other restaurants soon followed. A taco truck launched a weekly "one for you, one for them" special. A fine dining restaurant created a rotating menu item inspired by dishes made from culinary trainees, giving them credit and visibility. A breakfast diner began offering discounted morning meals for anyone enrolled in job training programs. The entire town seemed to lean into the idea that good food and second chances belonged together. Local shelters began reporting something surprising. More people were coming through their doors seeking help, not because homelessness had increased, but because trust had. People who once hid in alleys or abandoned buildings now stepped forward asking how to join training programs. They said they saw what happened to Miguel. They said they heard about Invisible Fridays. They said they wanted to try again. The shelter director called Keanu one afternoon. "Whatever you started," she said, "it's making people believe they matter again." But Keanu insisted he hadn't started anything. The work, he said, belonged to Miguel, the chefs, the volunteers, and every person who walked through the program's doors. Still, the town didn't let up. Invitations poured in community gatherings, charity breakfasts, award ceremonies, televised interviews, statewide recognitions. Keanu declined nearly all of them. When a reporter finally caught him outside Second Spoon and asked why he kept turning down honors that people felt he deserved, Keanu paused. His answer was simple. The spotlight should never be brighter than the people doing the work. The reporter nodded, taken aback by the humility in his voice. The quote ran in newspapers the next morning. But even then, Keanu stayed focused on the kitchen, not the coverage. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened with Miguel. Local schools began calling Second Spoon, asking if he would come speak to students about resilience, cooking, and second chances. The first request came from a middle school where several students volunteered on weekends. The principal said the kids were inspired by Miguel's story and wanted to hear from him directly. Miguel refused at first. "I'm not a speaker," he insisted. "I barely made it through my own past without falling apart." But then he offered something else. "I can't give speeches," he added, "but I can teach. If they have a kitchen, I'll show them how to cook." The principal agreed immediately. And so, one Thursday morning, Miguel walked into a school cafeteria with bags of ingredients and a shy smile. A dozen students gathered around him. He showed them how to chop onions safely, how to taste as they cooked, how to trust their instincts. The students whispered afterward that he was the best teacher they'd ever had. The town was changing. And Miguel was changing with it. The impact continued to spread in ways no one could have predicted. A small newspaper in Colorado ran a feature about Second Spoon, calling it a model for community rebuilding. A Texas radio host shared Miguel's story during a morning segment, describing him as proof that talent doesn't disappear, it only waits to be rediscovered. Soon after, chefs from Phoenix, Denver, and Albuquerque reached out to Second Spoon asking how they could replicate the program in their cities. Keanu read those messages quietly, often late at night, after the kitchen closed. He forwarded every inquiry to the program director, never inserting himself into the spotlight. His goal wasn't fame. It wasn't narrative control. It was momentum. He wanted the world to see that one act of compassion could move like a wave and lift others along with it. Meanwhile, Miguel found himself stepping further into leadership without realizing it was happening. Trainees naturally gravitated toward him, seeking guidance not only on technique, but on resilience. Some asked him how he kept going after losing everything. Miguel never pretended to have perfect answers. He simply told them the truth, that some days hurt, that some mornings he doubted himself, that cooking didn't magically erase the past, but it gave him something to hold on to. One night after closing the kitchen, Miguel and Keanu sat on the loading dock behind Second Spoon. The sky was clear and wide, full of desert stars. The building hummed softly behind them, filled with the lingering warmth of ovens and the smell of herbs. "You know," Miguel said, adjusting the grip of his reclaimed knife resting beside him, "I thought this place would be small. A little kitchen, a little hope. But this..." He gestured toward the lights of Santa Fe, where several restaurants still had signs advertising their own Second Spoon nights. "I never imagined it would reach this far." Keanu looked out at the same lights. People want to feel connected. They just need someone to show them where to start. Miguel nodded slowly. "It's strange. I spent years believing the world shrank around me because I failed. But now it feels bigger than ever." A soft breeze passed, carrying the distant sound of laughter from a nearby patio. It didn't sound like the same town where Miguel once felt invisible. It sounded like a place that had found its voice again. The next morning, more letters arrived at Second Spoon Notes from people across the country who had seen the critics' review, watched the viral photo resurface in news cycles, or heard about the program through word of mouth. Some letters were from struggling chefs, some from families who had lost loved ones, some simply said thank you. The movement had spread far beyond Santa Fe's borders. What began as a moment outside a diner had become a shift in culture, proof that compassion could be taught, replicated, and lived. And quietly, without asking for recognition or reward, Keanu and Miguel continued their work. Because the town had changed, and now the world was beginning to change with it. The idea for the benefit dinner began as a small conversation between the mayor and the director of Second Spoon. They wanted to expand the training program, open a second location, and offer scholarships for culinary students coming from shelters and halfway houses. They needed funding, they needed visibility, and they knew exactly where to host it. The historic El Dorado Hotel. Its rooftop ballroom overlooked the twinkling lights of Santa Fe, with gold-framed windows, deep sandstone walls, and chandeliers that cast warm light over every gathering held there. It was a place known for elegance, for celebration, for nights that felt bigger than life. The perfect stage for what the town hoped to accomplish. When they approached Keanu with the idea, he listened quietly, then asked one question: "Who will be the guest of honor?" The director hesitated. "We were thinking you." Keanu shook his head immediately. "If this event is going to mean something, then it has to honor the right person." His expression softened. "It should be Miguel." The director blinked, surprised at first, but then nodded in agreement. Miguel was hesitant when he heard the plan. He stood in the kitchen after hours, hands resting on a stainless steel counter, polished smooth by years of work. "I've never cooked at a gala," he murmured. "I've never stood in front of that many people. What if I freeze? What if they think I don't belong there?" Keanu stepped beside him. "You aren't going there because of who you used to be. You're going because of who you are now." Miguel looked down at his hands, the hands that once trembled from fear and memory, the hands that had now fed hundreds of people through a program built from hope. He took a breath. "If I do this," he said, "I have one request." "What is it?" Keanu asked. "Don't call me the man Keanu saved. Just call me Chef." Keanu smiled with quiet pride. "Then Chef is what they'll call you." Over the next 2 weeks, Miguel worked tirelessly, creating 3 dishes for the event. He tested flavors, adjusted seasonings, and practiced plating until each dish felt like a piece of his journey. The first was a bright chili lime ceviche, inspired by summers with his wife. The second was a pork and green chile ravioli, a bridge between his mother's cooking and the culinary techniques he learned as a young chef. And the third was invisible elevated for the occasion, served in handcrafted bowls from a local pottery studio that donated their work for the gala. The night of the event arrived with crisp desert air and a sky full of stars. Guests in suits and gowns filled the ballroom, their voices rising in warm anticipation. Candles flickered along linen-covered tables, and the scent of fresh herbs drifted from the kitchen. On each menu card, printed in elegant script, one line stood out: tonight's featured chef, Miguel Alvarez. For the first time in years, Miguel's name stood in a spotlight he had earned. Behind the swinging kitchen doors, Miguel stood in his crisp white jacket, the embroidered word chef resting over his heart. His hands were steady now. He took one slow breath, tasting the scent of simmering broth and roasted peppers, and whispered a quiet promise to himself. You belong here. The staff gathered around him, a mix of volunteers, second spoon trainees, and hotel cooks. Some were once homeless themselves. Some still lived in temporary housing. All of them stood taller because Miguel stood among them. Let's make this a night. People remember, Miguel said, lifting his chin. His voice held authority. Not forceful, not loud, but sure, confident. The voice of someone who had earned his place through fire and loss and survival. The first course went out. Servers carried plates through the ballroom as conversations fell silent. Guests stared surprised at the explosion of color and aroma. Compliments drifted back to the kitchen in waves. Miguel didn't celebrate. He simply nodded, focusing on the next dish. The second course followed, richer, deeper, layered with history and memory. Keanu watched from the corner of the kitchen, arms folded, soaking in Miguel's command of the room. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to help. He simply stood witness to a man stepping fully into his strength. By the time the final dish was plated, Miguel's face shone with a light sweat, but his smile was relaxed and genuine. Servers delivered the bowls of invisible to each table. The room grew quiet as guests tasted the stew. Some closed their eyes. Some looked at each other with surprise. A few leaned back in their chairs, touched by something they couldn't name. The ballroom manager approached Keanu and whispered, "They're going to ask him to speak. Should we prepare a podium?" Keanu shook his head. "Let him choose." A moment later, applause filled the room. It grew louder, fuller, rising like a tide. They weren't clapping for a celebrity. They weren't clapping for a program. They were clapping for a man who had rebuilt his life one dish at a time. The event host stepped forward at the microphone. "Chef Miguel Alvarez, would you honor us with a few words?" The ballroom waited. Miguel stepped out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. His steps were slow but steady. When he reached the center of the room, the applause softened. He looked out at the crowd, hundreds of people, dressed in their best, watching him with expectation. He cleared his throat gently. "I don't have a speech," he began. "I'm not good with microphones or crowds." A soft laugh rippled across the room. "I just have a truth," he continued. "One man gave me lunch, and now I get to feed the world back." Silence followed, the kind that carries meaning. Then the ballroom erupted into a standing ovation. Keanu watched from the back, eyes glistening. Miguel wasn't invisible anymore. He was a chef, a teacher, a voice, and tonight a town stood on its feet to honor him. 1 year passed quietly, not with headlines or viral photos, but with steady work, soft transformations, and lives stitched back together one meal at a time. What began as a single lunch in a Santa Fe diner had grown into something far larger than anyone imagined. The Second Spoon program, once just a hopeful pilot tucked into an old building off the plaza, now operated in 5 cities across the Southwest: Albuquerque, Tucson, El Paso, Denver, and Las Cruces. Each had their own kitchen, their own trainees, their own stories, rising like bread in a warm oven. Miguel Alvarez had become the heart of the movement without ever asking to be. He now lived in a small adobe home on the edge of Santa Fe, a modest 1-bedroom with soft earthen walls and a blue door he painted himself. The neighbors greeted him by name. Some dropped off herbs from their gardens, Others left handwritten notes thanking him for the meals he prepared at the center. Every gesture reminded him of how far he had come. Twice a week, Miguel taught classes at the original Second Spoon kitchen. His students ranged from men who had lived under bridges to women starting over after leaving shelters. Some had never held a knife properly. Some had been chefs long before misfortune knocked them off their feet. Miguel treated all of them the same, with patience, with respect, with the quiet belief that every person deserved a second chance. On Fridays, he led the weekly community dinners. Long tables filled the renovated hall draped in simple cloths, candles glowing at the center of each one. Residents, workers, families, travelers, and people who still lived rough all sat side by side. No tickets, no labels, no separation, just food and dignity. Miguel moved between tables with a gentle smile, checking on plates, offering seconds, listening to stories. He no longer hid from others. He welcomed them. During that year, Keanu Reeves stayed mostly in the background. He declined interviews. He refused awards. Whenever a reporter tried to turn him into the hero of the story, he redirected them back to the kitchens, back to the people doing the work every day. For him, this wasn't a headline. It was a commitment. Still, he kept an eye on Miguel from afar. Small updates reached him through friends in Santa Fe. He heard Miguel had planted herbs behind the kitchen. He heard trainees from the first year had found jobs in restaurants downtown. He heard the program had expanded because of new donors who were moved by the story. One morning, without announcement or fanfare, Keanu returned to Santa Fe. He rented a simple room, no entourage, no schedule, no cameras. He walked through the plaza, past the adobe storefronts and art galleries, and headed toward the Second Spoon kitchen. The door was propped open, letting in the warm desert air. Inside, he found Miguel ladling stew into a row of bowls, speaking softly to a young trainee who watched with admiration. Miguel looked up. His smile widened with recognition. Without hesitation, he set the ladle down and walked toward Keanu, wiping his hands on his apron. "You came back?" Miguel said. "Of course I did," Keanu replied, and the two men embraced like old friends who had traveled a long road together. Miguel led Keanu through the kitchen and out the back door, where a small garden stretched along the wall. Rows of peppers, tomatoes, herbs, and squash grew in tidy beds. A few students tended to them, nodding respectfully when they saw Keanu, but returning quickly to their work. No one asked for photos. No one rushed toward him. This place had learned from Miguel's example. People were seen here for who they were, not for who visited. "Didn't have much of a backyard growing up," Miguel said as they walked. "Thought I'd build one now." "You did good," Keanu said, kneeling to smell the basil. "Smells like a future dish." Miguel laughed softly. "Everything smells like a future dish to you." They returned inside where Miguel had prepared a small table near the window. Sunlight drifted across it, warming 2 bowls of stew and a stack of fresh tortillas. He gestured for Keanu to sit. There were no servers, no gala crowd, no speeches. Just 2 bowls, 2 chairs, and the quiet hum of a kitchen that had changed countless lives. "I made this earlier," Miguel said. "Figured you'd be hungry." "I always am," Keanu replied. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from mutual respect and shared history. After a few minutes, Miguel reached into a drawer beneath the counter. His hands moved slowly, carefully, as if holding something fragile. He placed a long, slim bundle wrapped in cloth onto the table. "I've been waiting to give you this," Miguel said. "Didn't want to rush it." Keanu looked at the bundle, then at Miguel. "What is it?" "Open it." Keanu unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay Miguel's old chef's knife. The same knife he had pawned, the same knife he reclaimed during his resurrection journey. But now it gleamed like new. The blade was polished to a mirror finish. The handle had been restored with dark wood, smoothed and oiled. Along the side of the blade, engraved in clean, deliberate lettering, were the words, "To the man who saw what others couldn't." Keanu exhaled slowly. His fingers traced the engraving, the weight of the gesture settling over him like a blanket. "Miguel, this is your knife, your history, and you're part of that history," Miguel answered. "If you hadn't stopped that day, I might not be alive. This knife used to remind me of what I lost. Now it reminds me of what I still have and what I can build." Keanu looked at him with a softness that said more than words could carry. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I'll honor it." Miguel smiled. "You already have." They finished their meal. Two men bound by a moment that had grown into a movement. No cameras, no headlines, just quiet, just friendship, and a future still unfolding. The late afternoon sun washed the streets of Santa Fe in soft gold as Keanu Reeves walked quietly toward the diner. Not the Second Spoon kitchen, not the renovated center, but the old rustic diner where everything had begun 1 year ago. The same wooden door, the same creaking sign, the same scent of roasted childs drifting into the street. He stepped inside. The place was busier than he remembered, full of tourists and locals chatting over plates of steaming food. A server offered him a bright smile, recognizing his face, but not making a scene. He nodded politely and made his way to the booth by the window. The same booth where he and Miguel Alvarez had first sat together. The same booth where hesitance had turned into hope. The same booth where a life had begun shifting back into its place. Keanu slid into the seat, resting his hands on the worn wooden table. The scratches along the surface glowed softly in the evening light. It felt like sitting inside a memory, not a dramatic one, not a cinematic one, just a quiet moment when doing the right thing changed the direction of someone's life forever. He watched people pass by the window, a young couple sharing a milkshake, an elderly man walking his small dog, a teenage girl laughing with her friends. He could have been one of these people on that day, someone who kept walking, someone who looked away, someone who didn't see Miguel at all. But he hadn't looked away. He had stopped, listened, seen. A server walked past carrying a steaming plate, and the smell of tortillas drifted over the booth. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. In his memory, he saw Miguel sitting across from him for the very first time, hands shaking over a menu he was almost too nervous to hold. He heard the tremble in Miguel's voice when he said he hadn't eaten in 2 days. He saw the way the entire restaurant froze when Keanu spoke 7 simple words that shifted the energy of the room. "He's dining with me." That moment still lived inside the walls of this place. The booth seemed to hum with it. The air felt heavier, as if holding the imprint of 2 lives brushing against each other and setting off a chain reaction that would eventually reach across cities, across hearts, across invisible lines people so often pretend not to see. Keanu placed his elbows on the table and folded his hands, looking silently out the window. He wasn't thinking of awards or headlines or the programs that now stretched into 5 cities. He was thinking of a man who once sat across from him with a cracked voice and an empty stomach. A man who now stood tall, cooked with confidence, and wrote his own future with his own hands. After a long pause, Keanu reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Unsealed, unadorned, just a simple piece of paper held between 2 fingers. He set it gently on the table right where Miguel's hands had once rested. On the front were 6 handwritten words: "To whoever sits here next. Pay it forward." He leaned back, letting the meaning settle. This wasn't about him. It never had been. Keanu looked at the envelope for a long moment, letting the words breathe in the quiet corner of the booth. He knew someone else would sit here eventually, someone tired, someone hurting, someone unsure of their place in the world. Maybe they would open it, maybe they wouldn't. But the message would remain, waiting, offering a spark to anyone who needed it. He stood slowly, his hands trailing across the wooden edge of the table. The restaurant noise carried on around him, soft conversations, blending with the clatter of dishes and the hum of the kitchen. Life continued, unaware of the small gesture left behind. That was the beauty of it. Not everything needed to be witnessed to matter. Some acts lived quietly, rippling outward only when the world needed them most. Keanu gave the booth one last glance. The sunlight had shifted, casting a warm glow across the envelope. It looked almost like a lantern waiting to be lit. He smiled softly and stepped out of the diner, pushing the door open to the gentle breeze, carrying the smell of roasted chiles and fresh bread. As he walked along the historic street, he reflected on the simple truth that had guided him from the beginning. Some stories don't begin with words. They begin with seeing someone. Not their clothes, not their mistakes, not the shadows they carried, but the person, the human beneath all those layers. If he had walked past Miguel that day, Santa Fe would still be Santa Fe. The diners would still serve breakfast. The tourists would still buy postcards. Life would look the same. But for Miguel, everything would be different. And for the hundreds of people who followed him into the Second Spoon kitchens, the ripple would never have begun. Keanu paused at the corner, watching a man help an elderly woman lift a bag of groceries into her car. A small act, a quiet act, but enough to remind him that compassion did not need a stage. He took a breath and turned inward, speaking the words that would close the chapter of this story. We all walk past people every day. What if we didn't? What if we looked and saw? The question lingered in the air, like a soft bell meant not just for those on the street, but for anyone listening, anyone watching, anyone who had ever felt unseen or overlooked. And then came the invitation, gentle yet powerful. Have you ever been helped by someone who saw you when no one else did? Tell us in the comments. Your story might be the encouragement someone else needs today. A second pause, a warmer tone. And if you want to see what happens when Keanu helps a child in trouble, make sure you're subscribed. There's another story waiting, and you won't want to miss it. With that, Keanu walked on, leaving behind a booth, an envelope, and a legacy of quiet kindness still spreading through the world.